Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1973 martial arts classic, Enter the Dragon. Now, this is one hell of an entertaining movie. I had a blast with this film. I can see why a lot of people find this to be enjoyable, really entertaining, and one of their personal favorites of this genre. Because this is a film that definitely does deserve the accolades and the cult following. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out to a longtime subscriber of mine, Mega Pork Chop Express, for requesting this review. If there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below. Now, Enter the Dragon is a film that really became a instant pop culture phenomenon. It really changed the landscape of martial arts films in the US and in other parts of the world, because prior to this film, martial arts films were really more of a genre that was popular in Asian countries. It was not really a genre that was really that popular in the United States or in other markets. This is a film that really put that genre on the map and made it something that was desirable outside of the already pre-established core audience for these kind of films. It made the audience more widespread. It also helped Asian representation when it comes to having an Asian star in a film that had a decent amount of money behind it. Not a massive budget, but it wasn't like it was made for pennies either. And not only that, like, there were a lot of other forms of representation in this film as well. I mean, you have Jim Kelly who plays a character in this, so you have some African American representation. And but I would say at this point in time, especially for a Western film, to have an Asian star, that was a big deal. That was not something that you saw that much of. And this is a film that was groundbreaking in that regard. It's directed by Robert Clouse, who was actually handpicked by Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee, he was an amazing man in so many different ways. He was an amazing physical specimen. He was an amazing talent when it comes to his ability to perform in the martial arts. But he was also a really intelligent, smart person. He had a magnetic personality, but he was not a guy who coasted on his personality or his charisma, or wasn't book smart. He was a guy who was really quite an intelligent individual, and he had a refined taste, and he knew what he wanted. And this film would not be what it is without Bruce Lee. He is arguably the most integral part of this film's success. And him wanting Robert Clouse because he saw a film that he did that featured a fight scene that he thought was particularly noteworthy is just one of many things that Bruce Lee brought to the table when it comes to this movie. He fought for Robert Clouse. Robert Clouse also happened to be one of the few directors that even wanted to do the film, because it really was not considered to be a big ticket film at the time. It was honestly considered to be an afterthought. The studio didn't really think that much about this movie. They even told Bruce Lee to his face that they are only doing this movie because it's cheap. Doesn't really have anything to do with Asian representation in cinema, because Bruce was understandably not necessarily distraught, but he was understandably on the fence about whether or not Western audiences would appreciate his ability, would appreciate his talent, would appreciate him being the lead in this film. And he had a lot of trepidation about that. And it's really a shame that he never lived to see this film premiere and become this big pop culture phenomenon and this instant box office smash, because then he really would have seen that his fears were honestly a little overblown. He would have seen that Western audiences would have welcomed him with open arms. And it's really sad to see that he never really got to experience that. He never really got to see that in action. And the direction in this film, I honestly think, is very dynamic. It's very fun. It's very lively. It's definitely over the top, very comic book. I mean, there's a line in the film where Jim Kelly's character says outright, "Man, you're straight out of a comic book." It's like the film is self-aware. Like, it knows that it's a comic book. It knows that it's a comic book style martial arts romp. It knows it's not supposed to be taken seriously. It knows it's over the top. And I love the fact that Robert Clouse's direction is very aware of that. So the direction is definitely as tongue-in-cheek as a lot of the rest of the movie is. But there are also moments of sheer spectacle. Some of the shots of Hong Kong and the boats on the river are honestly some of the best I've seen when it comes to capturing that setting. Uh, and Robert Clouse is definitely a guy who knows how to shoot fight scenes. He knows how to handle them in ways that really do showcase the grace and the power and the impact of a talent like Bruce Lee. Robert Clouse, he made Bruce Lee look like a fucking superhero. Like, fuck Shang-Chi. We already had Shang-Chi. It's called Enter the Dragon. I mean, honestly, we already had that movie. It's called Enter the Dragon. So you have this comic book style film, and it's very fitting that you have the lead be Bruce Lee at the height of his physique, the height of his charisma, the height of his power, and it's just so wonderfully displayed on the screen by Robert Clouse. He just captures that energy and that ferocity and that charm so well. And there's a lot of shots in this that are fairly ambitious. The mirror sequence, I mean, the way that was shot with the room of mirrors was masterful. It was a masterfully shot sequence. And there were a lot of other scenes that involved a lot of different moving parts and a lot of different styles of fighting and other stuff that he just handled really well. I think Robert Clouse just did a remarkable job overall directing Enter the Dragon. And the script I thought was pretty good too by Michael Allen. This is a screenplay that had story elements that would be copied for later pop culture phenomenons like Mortal Kombat. I mean, think about it. There is a group of fighters who get on a boat and they go to a tournament. It really is one of those things where you're like, wow, the creators of Mortal Kombat really did not hide much. They just straight up ripped off Enter the Dragon for their popular video game franchise. But I guess, hey, a lot of people say things like copying or imitation is a form of flattery. Well, I guess in this instance that definitely does apply. I mean, if you're going to imitate something, why not imitate one of the best films in this genre in Enter the Dragon? It's a simple but effective plot. You have Bruce Lee playing this character named Lee, who's a martial artist who works is not really the right word, who lives at this Shaolin temple and trains there, and he's tasked by his master to try to stop this guy named Han, who left the temple and then corrupted their ideals. And at the same time, he is recruited by this British spy agent type guy who wants him to infiltrate Han's island and figure out what's going on there and whether or not he's breaking the law, so they can finally have something to nail him with. And along the way, he meets these other fighters who decide to join this tournament. Yeah, John Saxon, who's this really down on his luck gambler who owes a lot of money to the mob, and he decides to join this tournament because he's heard that there's some money in it, and that might be a way for him to get out of his debts. You've got Jim Kelly, who plays this other martial artist who was invited to Han's Island. Apparently, him and Roper were in Vietnam together, and I really like the way that the film sets up the other fighters and their backstories. It's very short, but it's very effective because it just gives you a little bit of some flashbacks, let you know why they are going to this island, and that's all you really need. You really just need a scene with John Saxon getting accosted by mob guys telling him, hey, you better get us our money or we're going to have to break something. And then he breaks his foot off in their asses. And then you have a scene where it introduces Jim Kelly's character and shows his backstory. And his backstory and the reason for why he's going to the tournament is something that is surprisingly still very relevant today. Where he's this African American guy, just not really doing anything wrong. He gets essentially assaulted and taken against his will. Not necessarily taken against his will, but he gets targeted. He gets targeted by these police officers, these douchebag white cops, and they think that because he's black that he's a criminal, and they assume all this bullshit about him, and he actually fights back, so now they're going to try to arrest him, but he kicks their asses and steals their cop car. I loved it. It was cathartic. It was so cathartic. Even now, like it was definitely something that was cathartic back then for a lot of African Americans to watch that scene and be like, right on, man. you know get them. Fuck those pigs, those honky pigs. uh but yeah, so it was a nice little setup for his character. And I just really like how the film doesn't take itself too seriously. Like, it's in on the joke. It knows that it's silly. It knows that it's very pulpy. And I like how it goes quite far with that. I mean, the villain Han has a missing hand, and he has all these different attachments for his stump. So he'll have like a claw hand or a stone hand, and it's a lot of fun. It's really fun stuff. And the simple setup of the tournament works, as well as the secret plans or dastardly underdwelling doings by Han. It's one of those films where, yeah, there definitely are a lot of elements from other movies in this. You can definitely see a lot of James Bond influence with this film, but there's enough of an Asian flavor to it that it makes it feel like it's still something unique and still something that's definitely holding its own. And there are a lot of really just fun action set pieces, moments where fists are flying and feet are flying, and it's just an effective, simple, but well put together plot line It's not convoluted. The tone is consistent. There are some fun lines of dialogue, nice little banter between different characters. The only issue I really have with the script is the fact that one character dies. I really liked Williams. I thought he was a really good character. I thought he was a badass. And it was a shame that he died. And John Saxon's character, Roper, was the one that was left standing with Bruce Lee at the end, or was fighting alongside him. And apparently, from some sources, I mean, this could be completely incorrect because you never know when it comes to the internet, but according to some sources that I saw, Jim Kelly's character was initially supposed to be the guy who was the one who was standing tall at the end with Bruce Lee. But for some reason, because John Saxon was a bigger star, they switched things around. And I guess I can understand it because John Saxon was the bigger star at the time. But at the other end of the spectrum, I really wish they would have thought differently. Because Jim Kelly, he went on to become an instant star after this film. So in retrospect, it was honestly kind of a mistake. Because that way you would have had more Jim Kelly and you would have had more scenes with him. And he became a crowd favorite almost instantly. And that's not taking anything away from John Saxon and his character Roper. Like, he has his moments too, and he's not an unlikable character by any means, but he just isn't the same force of nature as Williams. Doesn't have the same gravitas. And it just would have been so much fun to see Bruce Lee and Jim Kelly fighting alongside one another in the climax instead of John Saxon. And there's also a little romance angle that is going on with John Saxon and this other gal, which really didn't do much for me either. I gotta be honest, I didn't really think that was something that needed to be really fleshed out or something that was a a continuous thread throughout the story. But other than just a little few things that I would have liked to have seen tweaked, like having Williams be the one at the end. For the most part, I did like the script. Simple but effective story. I even like the back story for Lee and his sister. The flashback scene where his sister is accosted and attacked by these other renegade martial artists at the temple who are led by Han. And I like how that sequence has a lot of really nice moments for a female character to kick some ass. Yes, it sucks that she ultimately gets cornered and she kills herself. She commits harikiri and stabs herself with a piece of glass, which that in itself was different too. I did not expect her to essentially end her own life. I expected her to sadly get raped and killed or something, considering this is the kind of thing that was the norm for these kind of characters. So it was actually a nice change of pace to see her uh, do the deed herself, take herself out to prevent these scumbags from taking everything from her. And I like that that set up why one of these characters who works for Han has a scar on his eye. And it was just an interesting and rather well written way to provide more depth to Lee and provide a backstory for one of these other characters, and also give you a little bit of an insight of when it comes to Han and the kind of person that he is. So yeah, I really thought that this script was quite solid overall. Just like the cast, I feel this is a really solid, if not spectacular cast. I mean, Bruce Lee, he's just an unbelievable presence in this film. I totally understand why people saw this film and were mesmerized by him, and they couldn't take their eyes off of him. Even though I honestly do feel the karate noises are a little irritating and silly at times, he still sells them because he's just such a charismatic and genuinely talented person. And he makes it something that seems like it's still rather authentic. And when it comes to other people trying to do the hoo-yah, hoo, it just comes across as dumb and rather daft. But when Bruce Lee does it, there's just something about it that just feels like it fits. And I think it's because he actually uh, found a lot of enjoyment in doing that and playing around with vocals in such a way. But I gotta be honest, there are some moments where I'm just cracking up, and I don't think I'm supposed to. You know, he's jumping on a guy and he's making faces. Ah! I'm like, what did you just do? Take a giant fat dump on that guy's face? Like, I just find those faces pretty hilarious, and I don't think that's really the intent, but it just adds to the enjoyment of the movie. So it's not really that much of a negative for me, but it is something I did notice. But despite that, I mean, Bruce Lee, he was just a master of martial arts and just a master of charisma, and he definitely is missed. He's sorely missed because he was just starting out with his career. Like, you could just see so many bright things for him on the horizon, and he was a supernova. He really was. He was a supernova, and sadly, he ultimately wound up becoming a dead star and faded away. But not before he left an undeniable impact and mark on pop culture and on cinema as a whole. And I mentioned this earlier, but it really is a damn shame that he didn't live to see this film's success and to just get to experience that and to feel the embrace of audiences and just to really see how much his work was respected and loved and admired by so many different people. But he's left a legacy that will last forever. So that's really impressive, considering that this is a guy. Let's be honest here; he's not the best actor in the world, but there was just something about him that just made him special. You gravitated towards him, and I think it's because of his confidence, his ability when it comes to the martial arts. I mean, this is a guy who, there was a moment on the set where this extra, he wasn't sold on Bruce Lee. He wasn't sold on the mystique of Bruce Lee. He was like, this is just an act. And he challenged Bruce to a fight. He was like, I'm gonna kick his ass. I'm gonna show the world that this guy is not anything. That he's just an actor. This is I'm gonna whoop his ass. And well, it ended about as predictably as you think. Bruce Lee kicked this guy's ass, and the guy had to relent, and Bruce still let him be an extra in the film, though. But I just love that. I love that story. I'm just imagining that scenario. Like, all these people, like, they're idolizing Bruce. They love this guy. They know that he's the real deal. But there's this one guy who's like, nah, this Bruce Lee guy, he's a fraud. Bruce Lee is a fraud. I'll show you. Hey, Bruce, come on, fight me. I'll show you what a real fighter is. And then he's just like, wow, and just fucking kicks his ass in like 30 seconds. Um, I also love the story that he would offer $100 to anyone on the set that would actually be able to get past one of his strikes, or actually get to him, and nobody did it. He never lost a single dime because he was the real deal. Like, the man was lightning fast. He was really a physical marvel. He knew martial arts. He knew what he was doing. And that definitely did show on film. I mean, just that scene with the nunchucks alone, I mean, god damn. That was just awesome. And there's just so many moments to just showcase his power and his strength, and it's a really terrific performance, despite the fact that, yeah, there's not a lot of dialogue, and some of the lines are a little clunky when it comes to the line delivery. But when you are such a magnetic personality, and when you are so talented, and when it comes to your physical ability, you don't have to be a masterful, amazing actor. And Bruce Lee is proof of that. John Saxon, he was fine too. John Saxon apparently got the role because he was a actual black belt, which I did not know. I did not know that John Saxon was a legitimate black belt. And that explains why he was able to hold his own and was able to actually believably showcase some martial arts skills, because he actually had some. Learn something new every day. I like John Saxon. This was a different kind of role for him, and he really nailed it. And he had his own charm and charisma when it comes to his character that worked rather well. And apparently, when he walked on the set, he thought he was the star, because Bruce Lee, who it was like, I'm the star of this movie, because I'm the one that the average Joe is gonna recognize on the side of the street. And I can see why he thought he was the star, but as much as I love you too, John, you weren't the star of this film. It was always Bruce Lee. Jim Kelly, he made his acting debut in this film. And while, yes, the acting by him is also not great either, but it doesn't have to be, because he's just oozing with charisma and charm and personality, and he's ripped, and he's just a fucking badass. Like, Jim Kelly was awesome in this. He was an awesome presence, and it sucked that this character had to die, and he wasn't the one at the end fighting alongside Bruce Lee. That was such a missed opportunity. And apparently he was a last minute casting choice. There was some other guy with a name I've never even heard of who got the role, but ultimately quit because he wasn't getting paid enough. So it's one of those things where it was fate that Jim Kelly would get that role last minute and make a name for himself. And as a result, he would make his own mark on history with his own series of films. And the rest of the cast is fine too. Ahna Capri as Tanya, Shih Kien as Han, the bad guy, the villain. I would say out of the cast, he's the one that really stood out the most when it comes to a performer. It was just a very sinister performance. Like, this is you could definitely see the inspiration for other villains that you would see in other films later on. Not just Mortal Kombat, but Mortal Kombat is a good example, because I saw a lot of Shang Tsung with this character, with Han. And Bob Wall, he was a nice physical presence too as O'Hara. The scene where Bruce Lee just whoops his ass is so badass. Like, the guy thinks he's tough shit, and then Bruce Lee just dispatches him like he's a fucking fly. You have Betty Chung, who plays Mei Ling, who's this operative who's working under cover as one of Han's ladies. Angela Mao Ying is Su Len, Lee's sister in the flashback. I want to bring her up because I felt that there was some really impressive choreography and some really nice moments where her character showcased her own physicality and her own feats of stunt work and just general amazement. And Jackie Chan, he had an uncredited cameo in this apparently. Uh, as one of the villains. Then you had Bolo Yeung, who played the main, essentially the main, henchman isn't the right word, but he was the main fighter that Han would throw at people if he wanted to really get the message across. Like, there's a whole scene where he goes up against all these guards from Han's palace and just brutally slays them all, breaks bones and crushes them. And he was a physical beast in this, and he was a physical beast later on in his career. Like, it's just amazing to me that Bolo Yeung, I he would go on to continue to have a really big career in martial arts and look like he didn't even age a week or even a fucking day. Like, the guy was in his 50s in Bloodsport, for fuck's sake. And he didn't even look like he really uh, spent that much time in between Enter the Dragon and whatever film he was doing next. Like, it really, I mean, he really did. He looked like he walked off the set of Enter the Dragon and then he was on Bloodsport. Like, you're just like, what the fuck? What an ageless wonder he was, or he is. I think he's still around. Yeah, yeah, he's still around. Is what an ageless wonder that man is. I mean, damn. Wonder what his secret is for longevity and vitality. Probably a lot of it has to do with genetics, but it's just an impressive mountain of a man, and had another good fight scene with Bruce Lee. And speaking of impressive mountain, an impressive mountain of a man, Sammo Hung. He had a fight scene with Bruce early in the film, and that was another thing that Bruce Lee decided to bring to the table when it comes to this film. It was his idea to have that opening fight scene with Sammo Hung. Like, that was something that he shot after, I think, principal photography, and something that he wanted to add to the movie because he felt that that would be a nice addition to the film. I know I might have said this multiple times, but it just begs and bears repeating. Bruce Lee was the catalyst when it comes to the success of this movie. So many things when it comes to this movie, from the sequences that were mostly choreographed by him when it comes to the fights, to scenes like him fighting Sammo Hung, or choices when it comes to the director like Robert Clouse, or even the score. I mean, the score is spectacular. I love this score by Lalo Schifrin, and that was all Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee liked his music in Mission Impossible, and Bruce Lee wanted him to do it. Bruce Lee even begged him to do the film, because initially he didn't want to do it because he didn't think there was enough money in it. But Bruce Lee kept going. He kept trying to get him to do it because he had faith and he really wanted Lalo, and he got him. And the rest is history. And the soundtrack wound up selling gold. Like, it sold hundreds of thousands of copies. Rightfully so. It's a great soundtrack. I love it. I think it's a really good score. And it also features some nice looking cinematography by Gilbert Hubbs. The editing was also well done by Kurt Herschler, George Waters, and Peter Chung. The editing in particular, I think, is really clever, especially when it comes to the flashback scenes. I like the way that the transitions are set up, where the camera gets fuzzy and a little blurry and then fades into the next scene. And a lot of the moments in the film just have so much more punch and so much more power to them because of how strong the editing is. This is very evident in the film's climax, in the Hall of Mirrors. It's not really a Hall of Mirrors, but it's a room of mirrors with like 8,000 fucking mirrors. 8,000 mirrors were used for that scene. That had to be a bitch to shoot, and a pretty rough sequence to edit as well. And everything just looks so seamless and so spectacular. And Yeah, I want to give the editors a lot of credit too, because they're a big reason why a lot of these scenes just have that punch to them. And speaking of punch, I also want to mention the sound effects, the sound editing. This has some really punchy sound effects that really do add to the overall power and feel of the film. And it's also a really fast paced film for the most part. It's 102 minutes. It doesn't even really feel like it's that long. It feels more like 92 minutes. It doesn't overstay its welcome too much. It's got a good pace to it in terms of the way that the plot unfolds, and there always seems like there's some kind of action going on in front of the camera, or there's something that's happening behind the scenes or underground that keeps your intrigue. Uh, yeah, it's a really entertaining, enjoyable blast of a movie that is just so much fun to watch that after it's over, you want to watch it again. I mean, that's a prime example of a classic film to me. It's a prime example of a movie that stands the test of time. A film that after it's over, you're like, let's watch this again. Because I really enjoyed that. And I had a blast. And it was a ride that I definitely wanted to take part in again. It's just a rollicking, high kicking romp. And I definitely would recommend it if you haven't seen it. And it's a film that deserves its status and its following and then some, because it's a really terrific, excellent film. So anyway, that's my thoughts on Enter the Dragon, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.